All right, it's time to do the top 10 greatest science fiction movies before Star Wars Episode 4 from 1977. Take a look at my top 10 list coming up next. Alright, so this top 10 video, I'm going to give you 10 movies plus other movies to watch of science fiction movies before 1977. Let's take a hard and fast look at them. Number 10 is a movie you might not have heard of, and there are a couple on this list that are unusual you won't find on other top 10 or even top 100 lists. This one is an animated French movie from the early 1970s. It is Fantastic Planet.
Elle ne bouge plus. C'est malin. Nous ne pouvons plus jouer avec elle maintenant.
Fantastic Planet is really interesting as an exploration of humans in the universe and ecology, ecological systems, and humans' place in nature overall. This is one of those classic sort of Gulliver's Travels, Lilliputian movies where the humans are made small and then attacked by, or on an alien planet, attacked by aliens. And, you know, that's a simple setup. This movie has great or very interesting animation, and the overall story is sort of depressing, so beware. But if you are not familiar with this movie, it's not a kid's movie, but watch it because it's got some of the major ideas of what humans are like in the universe, and we're not the triumphant, Star Trek characters who can dominate, discover, and colonize. In fact, it's just the opposite in this one, so that's a sort of classic science fiction storyline that you need to be familiar with. Number 10, they made several remakes of this movie. It captures the spirit of an age. It is Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
They're like huge seed pods.
This must be the way that body in my closet was formed. Miles, where do they come from?
I don't know. If they are seeds or seed pods, they must grow someplace on a plant, probably. And somebody or something wants this duplication to take place.
But when they're finished, what happens to our bodies?
This is a 1956 movie that, displays paranoia, Cold War era paranoia, as this movie's been classically read. The aliens, well, like in Fantastic Planet, in a way, they come to dominate, to colonize, and there's fear, there's terror in this movie as people are replaced by aliens who are taking over the United States of America. Now, you have to see this movie for all kinds of political reasons, perhaps socioeconomic reasons, and because of the science fiction premise of bodies being replaced by aliens, and thus you can get into other sorts of Invasion of the Body Snatcher movies. Number 8 is really fun, actually, and it's a classic movie that displays some of the interesting qualities of science fiction as unintentionally funny and as camp. This is the 1930 sequel to Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein.
No. This is good. Smoke. You try. Smoke. Good.
And I do think this movie is proto-camp or pre-camp. It's making fun of itself. It's making fun of its predecessor, Frankenstein, yet it's somewhat serious too. And of course, this movie sets up Mel Brooks' classic parody movie, Young Frankenstein. But The Bride of Frankenstein is pretty entertaining. It's got a lot of interesting scenes. The monster goes around. He actually talks in this movie. There are homunculi. There is the bride herself, a classic movie image. This is a classic Monsters with a Heart movie. And, you should probably watch the prequel to this or the original movie, Frankenstein, which has classic scenes but is far more serious. But this movie, I just really appreciate and enjoy, so you should watch it. Number 7, boy oh boy, if you haven't seen this, go watch it right now because it sets up all the zombie paranoia apocalyptic movies and TV shows and games from the last 50 years. It is George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Made on a shoestring budget, Night of the Living Dead just jumps into its scenario, and it does it very well. It reminds me of all the zombie games I've played. and as an imagined world that gestures towards a much, much larger problem and much, much larger world. This movie is top of the list. And of course, it's about the resurrection of the dead and the problems with that and people coming back from the dead and strangers and consumers in society, in mass society, and how you're being metaphorically attacked or assaulted by people you don't know or mass society at large. There's all kinds of ways to read zombie movies, but this is the one I think visually and imaginatively that starts it all, so it's a must-watch, Night of the Living Dead. Now, this movie is more of a high art movie, because at the time, that's what they would have called it. Jate by Chris Marker.
Était inhabitable, pourri par la radioactivité. Les vainqueurs montaient la garde sur un empire de rats. Les prisonniers étaient soumis à des expériences qui semblaient fort préoccuper ceux qui s'y livraient.
La Jate, the very famous French movie. And science fiction has always been an experiment in terms of visual and oral dimensions in film and in music. And here you have that with a slideshow. Really, that's mostly what this movie is. Just one or two shots of things or characters moving in the frame. As a slideshow, though, it is a movie, isn't it? I mean, what is a movie? This very film challenges the notion of film itself. It gestures towards this humongous world where an apocalypse has happened. It has time travel elements. There's a huge voiceover narrator, a heavy dose of that, but the images themselves as compositions are really interesting. And of course, La Jate influenced it's a movie that Terry Gilliam made, 12 Monkeys, which is a pretty good movie from the 1990s, and a number of other movies. So a lot of people love this movie and is a highly influential movie. Also for directors and filmmakers, please use still photos or still shots in your movies. The classic director Scorsese has done this, and this movie will lead you to some ideas for how you might use still images, so please go watch it. It's only like an hour or so not much of your time. Number 5 is interesting and special, I think, because it's one of those movies I think maybe better than the book it's based on. Pretty rare for that to happen. But the novelist I love, Walter Tevis, a great unsung American novelist, wrote this book, The Man Who Fell to Earth. And then in the late 1970s, Nicholas Roeg, a British director, had David Bowie star in the movie, The Man Who Fell to Earth. And this movie takes the book and runs with its premise and goes way beyond that as a critique of consumer culture, the individual and mass society. In this movie, you have an alien coming to Earth, and he's lost and he can't get back home, so he becomes a billionaire or trillionaire to try to get back home so he can have the resources to build a spaceship to do so, and yet he's alienated literally from society as an alien. Of course, this movie is talking about alienation, isolation, and all the existential problems of movies like, say, from the 1960s onward. I find this to be quite a good movie, sometimes interesting, shocking, and David Bowie, I think, was a great actor, so watch The Man Who Fell to Earth for sure. Number 4 sometimes does not get classified as a science fiction movie. I think it is. And it's one of the most influential ever. It's the 1930s movie King Kong. King Kong is ubiquitous as a monster in popular culture, as a monster figure. There have been a lot of sequels to King Kong and a lot of apes movies, including Planet of the Apes. This is the granddaddy of the sort of beast running amok in an urban society movies that we've seen all over the place. King Kong is a primal movie, simple plot, it's a parable. You can have a 5-year-old watch it. We'll get those kinds of kids stirred up in their imagination. Monster Island. And as an influential movie, they wouldn't have made the Godzilla movies probably. It would have been harder to imagine them without King Kong. And there are umpteen thousand Godzilla movies, which I could put the first Godzilla movie easily on this list, so you should watch that too. But King Kong is here at number 4. Rewatch it. It's great. Number 3 is a classic silent movie, and it's one of the greatest silent movies, which means it's one of the greatest movies. I already did a video on it. It's Metropolis. Metropolis is the foundational movie for a lot of science fiction movies in its depiction of a huge city with different social political elements. And in fact, cities in science fiction, both in terms of literature, written literature, and movies, are all important. And I think this movie, as a ancestor of so many movies that depict cities, whether that's Blade Runner or some of the Star Wars movies or the movie Dark City, you have to watch Metropolis in order to even understand so much film culture, both in terms of science fiction, but in terms of movies, period. The recent 2019 Best Picture Oscar winner, Parasite, quotes liberally from Metropolis, so it's a must-watch for movie lovers. And watch the restored version that it was amazing. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes long. They restored the movie pretty recently, so get a hold of that copy. Number 2 on this list is not a typical choice to put way up this high, but I put it up here because it fuels my imagination. That's why. It is Jean-Luc Godard's Alphaville.
C'était ma première nuit à Alphaville. Mais il me semblait déjà qu'une longue suite de siècles l'avait précédé. Pourquoi les gens ont l'air tristes et sombres?
Vous menacez la sécurité d'Alphaville.
And Alphaville, as another city in science fiction movie, combines film noir, detective stories, and science fiction, and only the way that Godard was doing in the mid-1960s. And I find that the stylistic flourishes and experimentation that Godard himself was doing at this time fit this movie's themes and ideas perfectly. A detective goes to a city to investigate, and there's a giant supercomputer, and it's about technocracy taking over our lives. And so the human heroes, can they overcome the technocracy or not? That's a classic science fiction setup. Because I like Godard so much, and so is French New Wave, I think this movie is really good, but it won't be so easy for people to watch on first viewing. It demands a rewatch probably, and it's not as easy as the other movies on this list. So you might wait a little while to watch this and watch the previous 8 movies or so on the list before you dive in to Alphaville, a great science fiction movie. Number 1, this is the mother of all special effects movies. And whether you like this movie or not, whether you in fact you hate it, as sometimes I do when I rewatch it, I gotta put it at number 1 because of its influence, its power as a film, and this one sort of fulfills a lot of things that film as a medium just of itself no other medium could do. It's 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. Some things about 2001, there aren't any real characters in this movie besides HAL 9000. He's the most interesting, complex character in the movie, and it's a computer. The humans in this movie are almost toys or pawns of, 1, the alien monolith, and 2, their own technological innovations. That's really interesting, and maybe it's a critique of humanity at this point in time, is that our tools rule us too much, rather than we living out sort of our full humanness, as it were. The blackness of space, the absence of sound, the classical music over the, moving ships. The spaceships in this, of course, influence all science fiction ship design since this movie came out in 1968. And everything about this movie is really interesting, including the trippy sort of new wave influence and weird stuff at the end. And Arthur C. Clarke wrote a novel along with Kubrick at this time. I read the novel. I just don't like it that much. So again, maybe this is another instance where the movie is better than the book. But whoever hasn't watched 2001: A Space Odyssey, well, you probably ought to, just because of film history and 20th century history period. So that's my list. What do you think about it? What would you put where? And what did I miss? And by the way, I threw a lot of Hollywood movies in here. Are there any international movies that you would put on this list from before Star Wars, from before 1977? Down in the description, check out my list of 1970s science fiction movies and my write-up of them. I've got Westworld down there and a bunch of other, Logan's Run, a bunch of other movies like that. And please subscribe to the channel for more great content like this. Thank you and have a great day.